Hey, in this video I want to show you how to pull in these awesome posters from Rotten Tomatoes. Now the tricky thing with that is that in iOS you have these UI image views, and these UI image views can't automatically download images from the internet and set the image for the UI image view. So instead you have to do that manually. Now it's convenient with CocoaPods to pull in third-party libraries to do very common tasks like that. So here we have our kind of stock movie cell, and I'm going to click on this title label and scoot it over here a little bit so that I can make room for my poster. Same thing for over here. So I'm going to drag in here a UI image view. So I'd like to put my poster here if I could. And while I'm in here, I'll finish setting it up. So let me make this a little bit more poster aspect ratio-ish and kind of clean that up a little bit. So I'm going to hit my Venn diagram thing here and create a new outlet for my image view. Now I'm not going to call it image view because image view will collide with a default property in UI table view cell also called image view. And so it's important for me to call this something else. So I'm going to call this poster view. So once I've created an outlet for this, then I'm done setting this movie cell up, and I'm going to come back to my movie view controller. Let me save this storyboard here. So come back to the movie view controller, and in here somewhere, I want to set up this image. Now I can start by grabbing the URL here. So if I were to copy this URL and say, well, I want a new NS URL, and say grab in the movie value for key path. Now I'm using this one instead of the dictionary because I can see here that this is actually a nested structure. So I could grab the poster's dictionary and then grab the thumbnail key, but I'm going to skip a step and say navigate nest into this dictionary. So I'm going to do that using a syntax called posters.thumbnail. It's a little bit like XPath. So here I'm just going to say posters.thumbnail, and I need to cast this as a string. So I'm going to live dangerously and do a forced downcast. You shouldn't do this in practice. So at this point, I'd love to be able to configure the poster view with this URL, but I can't just yet. I need some help. So the way that you bring in libraries in iOS is if I go to iOS_tomatoes, which is my project, I'm going to create a new file using this command called pod init. So pod init, the purpose of that is to create this thing called a pod file. If I look at this pod file, I can see that by default it has two targets set up, one for my project and one for my tests. So inside of this block, I'm just going to start to list any library that I want to bring in here. So AF networking is a really popular networking library that's written in Objective-C, but there's many others. So you can go to CocoaPods.wantedly.com or the CocoaPods website and say, hey, I want a sweet date formatter. So I can look in here and see that there's a lot of libraries related to date management. So once you've found your libraries, then you kind of enumerate them here. And then so I'm going to quit this. And then I'm going to type in the command pod install. So pod install will parse the pod file, and it will start to actually download the versions that the latest versions of those things. So once I've done that, I can notice that there's a new file here called podfile.lock, and this captures the versions of all of the libraries that I've pulled in at the time that I did pod install. So it kind of freezes it there until you update. So I'm going to open up Xcode again because it crashed. But it's actually a convenient time to restart it anyway because we normally open Xcode project files. Once you use pod files, you have to use the workspace file instead. So the workspace file is simply an Xcode concept where it contains multiple projects. So for example, I have the project that I created, But then I also have this new project, which is this pods project that contains all of my dependent libraries. So I'm going to restart Xcode real quick because it looks like it didn't correctly pull in my Rotten Tomatoes project file. So I'm going to give it another try. So this time it successfully pulled in my project file. Who knows what happened there? So I'm going to open up my story. I'm going to open up my movies view controller. And somewhere in here, I'd like to do something like cell.posterView. And I wish I could do set this image with this URL, but I can't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leverage one of the category methods or extensions of UI imagery that's in AF networking. But because this is an Objective-C, I need to do something a little special here. So the good news is that it's really easy to use both Swift and Objective-C. So I'm going to create a new Objective-C file. I'm just going to call this dummy because I'm going to delete this later. Because the purpose of creating this Objective-C file is actually to create this so-called Objective-C bridging header. So I'm going to click yes here. And you can freely delete this dummy.m. You're not going to use this anymore. Make sure to move to trash here. And then inside of this header file, you can just import whatever Objective-C file that you want, and it's going to be pulled into the Swift namespace. And notice that the Swift namespace is actually flat, unlike Objective-C. So once this is in here, this is accessible in any class that I have. So I'm going to pull in UI image view plus AF networking. This is the syntax for extensions. It's the same convention in Swift, generally speaking. So the class that you're extending plus the name of your extension. So now magically, I should have a new method called setImage with URL. And I'm going to pass in the URL now. So if I run this, then if I'm lucky, I should see some posters here pulled in from the API. So this is an illustration. The primary point of this illustration is two things. One, it's to show you how to pull in libraries that you might be interested in using pod files and pod install. And the second thing is that you can pull in Objective-C libraries as well, and you just need to bring them in via this bridging header.